Introduction, Books and Their Relevance. Hello, and welcome to this deep dive into the fascinating world of the philosophy of language and thought. Before we unravel the threads of Gorgias' arguments and explore the twists and turns of ancient and modern linguistic philosophy, let's talk about the two books that guide much of our discussion. First up, Michael Morris, An Introduction to the Philosophy of Language. This book serves as a roadmap to modern analytical philosophy of language, covering key concepts like sense, reference, truth, and meaning. Think of it as your essential toolkit for understanding how language works, and sometimes doesn't. Next, we have the sourcebook in the History of Philosophy of Language, edited by Cameron, Hill, and Stainton. Spanning ancient to modern times, this compilation includes primary texts from thinkers like the pre-Socratics, Plato, and Locke. It's like a time machine, letting you hear directly from the philosophical greats. Both books are dense but rewarding, kind of like trying to explain TikTok to Socrates. Now, let's dive into the lecture content and unpack it all. Section 1, Language and Thought, the Big Picture. The philosophy of language grapples with some fundamental questions. How does language relate to thought, reality, and communication? And why does this matter? Modern analytical philosophy of language, as Morris emphasizes, often starts with Freya, but many of its concerns trace back to ancient debates. The sourcebook reminds us that these issues have historical and cultural dimensions, extending beyond the Western tradition into Indian, Chinese, and African philosophies. Philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and later medieval and modern thinkers have tackled these questions. Meanwhile, analytical traditions focus on recurring topics like the nature of language, what is it? Just sounds, or something more? Sense and reference, how do words point to things in the world? Truth and meaning, how do words express truths? Spoiler alert, if you're expecting simple answers, you're out of luck. But hey, the journey is the fun part, kind of like binge-watching a show where every episode ends in a cliffhanger. Section 2, Gorgias of Leontini, the OG skeptic. Gorgias, a 5th century BCE sophist, wasn't here to make friends. He's famous for his work on what is not, or on nature, where he drops 3 philosophical bombs. There is nothing. Even if there is something, we can't know it. Even if we can know it, we can't communicate it. Yes, Gorgias basically invented the original, what if we're in a simulation, argument. Let's break this down. Section 3, The Arguments of Gorgias. Argument 1, there is nothing. Gorgias argued that if we claim something exists, we have to define existence. But definitions themselves rely on language, which he considered unreliable. If nothing exists, well, philosophy suddenly becomes a lot easier, or does it? Argument 2, if something exists, we can't know it. Here, Gorgias challenges the idea that thought and being are connected. Just because we can think of a flying human or a chariot racing across the ocean doesn't mean these things exist. Thoughts can go wild, kind of like when you daydream about acing this exam without studying. Gorgias argues that the domain of what we think about exceeds what's real. Argument 3, if we can know it, we can't communicate it. Even if we manage to know something, Gorgias claims language is too flawed to express it. Words are symbols, and symbols can never fully capture the reality they represent. It's like trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who's never had it. You can try, but words will always fall short. Section 4, Implications of Gorgias' Philosophy. If Gorgias is right, communication is an illusion, society's cohesion unravels, and philosophy's very foundation crumbles. His critiques were part of a larger challenge to the natural philosophers, who sought to explain reality's fundamental nature. Gorgias wasn't just the party pooper, he was the one flipping the table at the philosophy party. Other sophists, like Prodicus, responded differently, focusing on the correctness of names. Prodicus argued that language should mirror reality, one name for one thing. But what happens when names fail to correspond? That's where ambiguity, falsehood, and fiction rear their heads. Section 5, From Skepticism to Solutions. Philosophers didn't just throw up their hands in despair. Heraclitus and Parmenides offered their defenses. Heraclitus embraced contradiction, claiming the world is in flux, and language reflects its contradictions. Parmenides, on the other hand, dismissed change and contradiction, suggesting that only what is can be thought or spoken. Later, Socrates and Plato tried to rehabilitate language. Socrates emphasized communication and practical knowledge, while Plato explored definitions and the possibility of a perfect, universal language in works like Cratylus and Sophist. Section 6, Why This Matters. Understanding the philosophy of language isn't just an academic exercise. It influences how we think about communication, society, and even ourselves. The arguments of Gorgias challenge us to think critically about the limitations of language, and the importance of striving for clarity and precision. If nothing else, it's a great conversation starter. Next time someone tells you, words can't hurt, you can reply, actually, Gorgias would argue that words can't even convey reality, let alone hurt. Closing thoughts. Thanks for sticking with me on this journey through the philosophy of language and thought. Whether you're reading Morris analysis or diving into ancient texts with Cameron et al., remember that every word we study is a step closer to understanding how humans make sense of the world. And if Gorgias were here, he'd probably remind us that even understanding is just a construct, but hey, let's not overthink it. Here's a comprehensive, engaging, and fun script that covers the lecture material and addresses your questions about Plato's Cratylus. This will work well for a text-to-speech program. The origin and purpose of language, Plato's Cratylus. Hi there. Welcome to today's lesson on Plato's Cratylus. Buckle up, because we're diving into the fascinating, and sometimes puzzling, world of language, meaning, and philosophy. Don't worry, I'll keep it fun, with a sprinkle of jokes and puns to keep your mind sharp. Let's get started. What's in a name? The Cratylus is one of Plato's dialogues, where Socrates, Cratylus, and Hermogenes debate the correctness of names. Essentially, they're asking, how do words relate to reality? Here are the three main perspectives they explore. By convention, Hermogenes argues that names are purely conventional, just labels that people agree on. For example, why is a dog called a dog? Because we agreed it's not a cat. It's like naming a Wi-Fi network, as long as everyone agrees, it works. By nature, Cratylus counters that names must somehow reflect the true nature of the things they name. According to him, there's an inherent correctness in language, like how the word buzz sounds like what bees actually do. A tool for understanding, Socrates takes a middle ground. He agrees with Cratylus that names should ideally reflect reality but points out that even imperfect names still function as tools for communication. It's like using a slightly blunt knife, it might not be perfect, but it still slices. Language as a tool. Socrates compares names to tools, like a shuttle used in weaving. A tool's purpose is to divide and shape things properly, and language should do the same for reality. This means, a name should help us understand the essence of something, e.g., what makes a triangle a triangle. To use a tool, or a name, properly, you need skill. In this case, the skill of a philosophical dialectician who understands the nature of reality. And here's where it gets tricky, names in everyday language are often flawed. Why? Because historical name-givers weren't philosophers, they divided things according to common sense, not deep metaphysical truths. For example, grouping all non-Greeks under the term barbarians is oversimplified and misleading. The Etymology Olympics. Now for the fun part, Plato's etymologies. Socrates playfully examines the origins of words, like Hector, Astyanax, or virtues like wisdom and courage. Here's where things get wild. Some etymologies reflect the Heraclitean worldview, where everything is in constant flux. For instance, the word phronesis, practical wisdom, could mean understanding of motion or delight in motion. Others suggest a static worldview, where things are stable and unchanging. But what's the point of all these quirky word origins? Scholars debate this. Parody, maybe Plato is poking fun at how people use etymology to twist ancient texts to fit their beliefs. Mastery. Plato could be showing off his linguistic skills to establish credibility. Philosophical critique, the etymologies might reveal the flawed metaphysical assumptions of past name-givers. Either way, the message is clear, language, while fascinating, is an imperfect tool. It reflects the beliefs and limitations of its creators. Philosophical showdown, Socrates versus Cratylus. So, which view does Socrates ultimately support? While he agrees with Cratylus that names should align with nature, he rejects the idea that an incorrect name ceases to be a name. Even flawed tools can be useful. Socrates emphasizes that knowledge is possible because reality has a stable essence. Dialecticians, philosophers, must strive for better names, knowing that language can never fully capture the truth. Readings at a glance. The assigned readings from Cratylus delve into these debates in more detail. Key sections include 383c, 391c, Hermogenes and Cratylus argue about conventional versus natural correctness. For 11a, 413c, the playful etymologies reveal Heraclitean and static worldviews. For 22c, 440e, Socrates critiques ordinary language and underscores the dialectician's role. These sections showcase Plato's wit and his deep exploration of language as a window into reality. Jokes and takeaways. Why did the name giver get a bad review? He wasn't a dialectician and just winged it. Socrates would agree, if your words aren't sharp, at least use them wisely, they're still tools. And that's a wrap. Plato's Cratylus invites us to think about how language shapes our understanding of the world, and how it sometimes falls short. Whether you side with Hermogenes, Cratylus, or Socrates, one thing's clear, names are more than just words, they're bridges to reality. Now go out there and name your Wi-Fi something profound. How about Heraclitean flux? Here's a detailed and engaging script for you to use, tailored for a text-to-speech software. It incorporates a thorough explanation of Aristotle's categories and the interpretation, along with some academic jokes to keep it lively. Aristotle, or the signification of words. Introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for a journey through Aristotle's linguistic and philosophical playground. If the phrase ancient Greek semantics sounds as exciting as watching paint dry, I promise this will at least be wet paint. We're diving into Aristotle's categories and the interpretation, exploring how words, thoughts, and the world connect. Part 1. The basics of Aristotle's categories. Let's start with categories, where Aristotle essentially invents the first philosophical filing cabinet. He organizes reality into categories to explain what things are and how they relate to each other. Imagine trying to explain a horse to someone from scratch. Aristotle says you'd classify it as a substance, a specific thing like this horse or that horse. A quality, like fast, black, or graceful. A relation, like taller than a goat. He even ranks substances. Primary substances are individual things, this horse, Socrates, or your neighbor's cat. Secondary substances, like horse or animal, are categories these individuals belong to. Aristotle says primary substances are the bedrock of existence. Without them, secondary substances wouldn't exist. Kind of like how without pizza, you couldn't have pepperoni as a topping. But Aristotle's categories aren't just about things, they're about how we talk about things. He insists that words signify these categories but warns us not to mistake the map for the territory. Just because you say, fast horse, doesn't mean the horse is galloping out of your mouth. Part 2, Words, Thoughts, and Things. Now, onto the interpretation, Aristotle's linguistic magnum opus. Here, he tackles how words, linguistic symbols, connect to thoughts, affections of the soul, and the world, things. This is where we get the semantic triangle. Picture a triangle with words at one corner, they're the sounds we utter or scribble. Thoughts at another, our mental concepts of things. Things at the last, the actual stuff in the world. Words symbolize thoughts, and thoughts are likenesses of things. But, and here's the kicker, this process is both natural and conventional. It's natural because our thoughts reflect reality, a horse looks like a horse in our mind. It's conventional because we agree on what noises mean, we all call it a horse in English, not caballo. Aristotle even dives into why thoughts are affections, pathemata. He describes perception as a passive process, where our senses receive the world's forms, and our intellect processes them. Think of it as the world sending an email to your brain. No spam filters included. Part 3, The Building Blocks of Speech. Aristotle then breaks down linguistic Lego. A name, onoma, is a word like Socrates. It signifies something without involving time. A verb, rima, adds action and time, like runs. Combine them, and you get a sentence, logos, which can be true or false. Socrates runs, is a statement, Socrates dances like Elvis, is, well, questionable. Here's where Aristotle gets playful, not every sentence is a statement. Prayers, poetry, and jokes don't aim at truth. So, next time you're at a party quoting Aristotle, tell people you're not just making statements, you're crafting logos. Classy, right? Part 4, Affirmation and Negation, Yes or No. Aristotle also introduces affirmation, cataphasis, and negation, apophasis. Affirmations say, this is the case, like, the cat is on the mat. Negations say, this is not the case, like, the cat is not tap dancing. He explains that truth and falsity only arise from this combination of ideas. Saying cat or tap dance on their own doesn't mean anything until you stick them together. Kind of like how yelling coffee doesn't make the barista appear, but saying I want coffee might. Part 5, Why should we care? What's the point of all this, you ask? Aristotle's theories weren't just abstract musings. They laid the foundation for semantics, logic, and even computer science. His exploration of categories influenced how we classify knowledge, while the interpretation shaped debates about truth, meaning, and language. Remember Plato's analogy of the painter in Cratylus? He said language is like art, a mix of elements, crafted to reflect reality. Aristotle takes this further, showing how the painter's brushstrokes, words, must correspond to the subject, reality. But if Plato is the dreamy artist, Aristotle is the meticulous architect, building bridges between thoughts, words, and the world. Conclusion: philosophy, words, and a smile. In sum, Aristotle isn't just being pedantic about grammar, he's tackling the big question of how humans connect with reality through language. He shows us that words matter, they shape how we think and interact with the world. So, next time you're stuck in a 3-hour lecture on Aristotle, remember, it's not just about dusty books or old ideas. It's about the building blocks of human thought, and maybe even why your cat isn't tap dancing. Philosophy can be fun. You've just got to give it the right logos. Understanding propositional meaning, Stoics and Freya. Introduction. Welcome to this exploration of propositional meaning, a central topic in philosophy of language. This discussion will bridge ancient Stoic philosophy and modern contributions by Gottlob Frege. By the end, you'll gain insight into how meaning operates within language and how these ideas have evolved over centuries. Part 1, The Stoics and Propositional Meaning. Materialism and the notion of lekton, seibos. The Stoics operated within a materialist framework, believing everything corporeal was either active or passive. However, they made exceptions for incorporeal entities, such as time, place, void, and most importantly, lekton, the seible. Lekton bridges thought and speech, it is the content of what is said and is central to their philosophy of language. Materialistic analysis of language. Sound, phone, is produced by the percussion of air, and for humans, it becomes articulate due to reason. Words consist of letters, stoicheia, understood as sound, written symbols, or names. The logos, statement, is a significant sound that conveys pragmata, things, as lecta, seibos. Chrysippus on dialectic. Chrysippus identified 3 interconnected components. Name-bearer, tunchenon the external object, e.g., Dion himself. Signifier, semenon the spoken or written word. Significatum, seminomenon the lekton, or seible, which is true or false. This distinction influenced semiotic theories, including Saussures' concepts of signifiant, signifier, and signify, mental representation. Uses of seibles. Seibles clarify meaning in judgments, even false ones. For instance, the sentence, "I want a bicycle," signifies more than a material object, it represents a desire tied to a condition. Part 2. Frege's innovations. Frege's philosophy of language. Gottlob Frege's work addressed limitations in earlier theories, such as Locke's psychologism, which linked words solely to mental ideas. Frege emphasized shared sense, shin, and reference, bedeutung, to separate individual conceptions from collective meaning. Core principles. Principle of context. The meaning of words is determined by their role within a sentence. Principle of compositionality. The meaning of a sentence depends on the meanings of its components and their arrangement. Sense and reference. Sense, shin the mode of presentation of an object. Reference, bedeutung the actual object or truth value referred to. Example, the morning star and the evening star both refer to Venus, bedeutung, but differ in their senses, shin. Propositional attitudes. In sentences like, Carol believes the morning star appears in the evening, the embedded proposition has a sense, not its usual reference. This explains why substituting morning star with evening star can alter the truth of the overall statement. Conclusion. The Stoics introduced the foundational concept of lekton to explain the incorporeal aspects of meaning, paving the way for later advancements. Frege expanded on this, introducing systematic distinctions like sense and reference to address complex semantic issues. Together, their insights provide essential tools for understanding language and its role in conveying truth and thought.